I have not seen such a strong response spiritually from students. I don't think ever, honestly.
Welcome to the One Cry Podcast, a nationwide call for spiritual awakening. The goal, accelerating the movement of God through sharing revival truth, stories, and reports.
Well, hello, One Cry Podcast family. I'm so grateful for the way Bill and Kyle and so many others are leading this podcast. And so many pastors and leaders are tuning in. They're watching, they're listening. And above all, their thirst and hunger for revival is increasing and growing, I believe, as a result of well over 100 episodes now of this One Cry podcast. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm blessed as a One Cry founder to be able to periodically just interview a testimony, a story, or a strategic partner in the mission of revival. And so today, I'm so grateful to have Geoff Eckart. He is pastor of up in Grand Rapids. He leads a ministry called Never the Same, a powerful ministry to junior high and senior high. And he's also more recently taken over the role of the National Prayer Committee, following David Butts, who served in that capacity for over 2 decades. So I am so grateful today to talk to Geoff, particularly. Geoff, by the way, where in the world are you? You look like you're in a space capsule. Is that where you are?
I'm in my RV right now in Iowa for one of our summer youth camps.
Wow, Iowa, summer youth camp. That's better than, some political rally that typically takes place in Iowa, right?
It's happening right now, actually, all over the state. Somebody reminded me of that.
Yeah, well, good. And you do these in the summertime. And as a result of that, honestly, you are really engaged, and I've so appreciated this, and have a pulse with what God's doing, especially among youth and even campuses and college age. And I just thought it'd be great for our podcast pastors and leaders and just listeners and viewers to kind of get caught up, or 6 months maybe since February or so, since God moved there at Asbury. And I don't know what you've sensed as far as continuing stirrings or spirit of revival, anything different in just your touch points out there with youth, particularly this summer. Talk to us a little bit about Asbury and the after effects.
Yeah, boy, Asbury. My wife and I and our youngest daughter got there on Saturday when Asbury had started on Wednesday. So we were there before really a lot of people were showing up. We were one of the first kind of outsiders, I think. And so got to experience that. And then Myron, we were there that when it ended, that last day in the Collegiate Day of Prayer.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, watching it and seeing it from a perspective of being there in person, right at the beginning and right at the end, but not being there, as a part of the Asbury family and community, but watching it from the outside, seeing it impact the church I pastor, Daybreak in Grand Rapids. Mm-hmm. We drove back late through the night Saturday when we were there, and I just shared that morning, hey, this is what we experienced, and people just flocked to the front, to the altar. Mm-hmm. And it was a very unusual, what I would call kind of spillover moment. And we heard a lot of that happening. And then going into the summer, we had something really interesting. My wife is the camp director. I founded this camp. It's called NTS Camp. That's where I'm at right now. But we were interviewed, and in the interview, she was asked, how will you lead or experience camp differently as a result of Asbury this year? Mm-hmm. And I think that question really was kind of like an agenda question, like, oh, okay, what does this mean? And so we just kind of reoriented it a little bit for our camps and what we found. And I started this camp in the year 2000. This is our 24th summer. We missed one from COVID in 2020, but I would say, Brian, that number one, I have not seen such a strong response spiritually from students. I don't think ever, honestly. And we have seen a hunger and a desire from young people to experience God in a way I've never noticed. And I'll give you one example just that happened Just a few days ago, we had a student come forward to pray for healing. And we've been seeing an extended time of worship and prayer every week. Now we're talking about students that attend our camps all the way from the western part of the United States and western South Dakota, all the way over to New York, all the way down to like Louisiana, Texas, and everywhere in between. And we've seen the same thing. So it's not just isolated to one area or even one type of church. Big churches, mega churches, all a universal expression. So we had a student come forward during one of our extended, just kind of impromptu worship and prayer moments, praying for healing from some sexual abuse that she'd experienced in her past, asked her pastor to pray for her. And because of the trauma in her life, because of her trying to deal with things, she had turned to cutting. She's praying and asking for God, and her pastor's praying, asking that God would just deliver her from the trauma of that. When they're done praying, this was just a handful of days ago, all the scars on her arms were gone.
Amen. Yeah.
And that is one of many. Now that's a story that's unusual in terms of, what we saw in a literal physical sense, but we've seen this spiritual release that I have not seen before. And I attribute it to what God began in Asbury.
Yeah, I think, boy, Geoff, several takeaways from Asbury, but one of them for me has been it's given credibility to revival. I feel like we had lost hope, didn't think it could really happen. The extraordinary work of God, as you just described, is something way past in history, and it just lent such credibility. And you mentioned about the freshness of the worship. And I know this probably dates this podcast a little bit, but we're in the middle in the studio of taking the video footage and the audio from the final night of Asbury and producing a resource of worship. And it is amazing. It's like you envision yourself being there. It's like no other worship. It's like these people are all free, like you just described. They're just free from the bondages and the addiction, and free just to worship Jesus in their wholeness. And there's something that's different as I listen to even a rough draft of that or a rough cut of that. So the other thing, and here's a question maybe for you, Geoff. I think another takeaway, and you kind of alluded to it, is I think campuses and churches and maybe camps are now making space for God. They're just saying we don't have to be right to the second of everything. Waiting on God, making space for God, and letting Him move. And I don't know if you're sensing more of that out there in the arenas and where you're serving, but to me, that's so important.
It is. I would say to you, and being really transparent with you, that in the years that I was director of our camp, we were very strict in terms of small group moments, which happen after our evening sessions, are a very high priority. We invest financially in those moments with leaders being there and different things. And so we're always very tight on making sure that was a priority. But there has been a shift, and I'll just speak to us. I do agree, Byron, that I feel that there's a general sense of more openness, but for us, and I attribute this really to my wife's leadership, Ariana, who directs our camp. She said this summer, as a result of Asbury, we're going to kind of take our hands off the schedule and just see what God does. And He has been faithful, and we always have powerful moments. 86% of kids that come to our camps make some kind of spiritual decision. But this summer is different. It is different. And we absolutely have felt like it is a direct result of that freedom and of what God began there on that campus of Asbury in February, without a doubt.
So maybe a final little word of counseling or advice to pastors or youth pastors that are listening as students come back and to their next gathering and their next approach or philosophy or heart as it relates to their youth groups and their college students, etc.
Yeah.
How would you suggest, since Asbury, post Asbury? Uh, and I know it's not methodological. I know it's not, you can't manufacture or make it happen. But maybe how can they set the sails a little differently now than what they did before that would give greater freedom, perhaps, for what you just said, for God to move and show up with his presence?
You know, I've been in youth work for 30 years, and I do other things now, obviously, but still keeping a pulse on it. I think in general, this generation is like every generation. They are ready to take on more than maybe what we as adults give them credit for. So I just encourage leaders, don't project any limitations. Allow for those moments. Don't be afraid to go deep. Don't be afraid to challenge. Don't be afraid to open the door for students to lead the way, because I've generally found, and I'm sure you've done a lot of teaching and conversation about this, Byron, but revivals historically always have a common component of young people being right there involved, typically right in those origin moments of when God moves unusually. And so I think we got to allow them. And I want to give something really specific, and this is unique, but God directed our Claim Your Campus prayer team, Claim Your Campus students praying at middle and high schools, student-led groups around the country, last fall of 2022, to focus specifically on praying and empowering 12-year-olds. And I think there's something that God is doing, and I just believe younger and younger, we need to be thinking about how do we reach. So college is important, high school is important, but more than ever for me and for our church and for our ministry, we're really zeroing in on that even younger middle school age. We think that's an important. They're the last age of Gen Z, by the way. 12-year-olds are, before we flip to the new generation.
Wow, that's encouraging for me to hear. I have a little booklet here in my library somewhere I'll never forget I read, and it's called Children of 59 in Ireland. And it was the children that God used, because I think just their faith. They don't have all the hang-ups perhaps and baggage or whatever, but it was the children that began to pray and began to cry out. And that was the ignition point of a revival. So, wow, thank you for reminding us the importance of that age group and the youth, and what God is doing in and through them. And you are so right. Think of Evan Roberts, even Jonathan Edwards, when he preached sinners in the hands of an angry God, and the Jesus movement, and the list goes on. It's that 20 and 30-year-olds that often God even uses to ignite something and give leadership to it. So, Geoff, thanks for your leadership all these years, and I'm so grateful for you and where God has placed you. I don't know how you can be a husband. Maybe your wife is asking the same question. The National Prayer Committee chairman, never the same. Claim Your Campus. And I notice on Never the Same, you focus on theology, community, I think, and technology, and then do all this itinerant speaking and pastoring a church there at Daybreak in the Grand Rapids area. But wow, I commend you for giving your whole and pouring your heart and life into this. So God bless you, Geoff. Thank you, One Cry podcast family. And pray for Geoff. Pray for Never the Same. Pray for the National Prayer Committee and all that is involved there, that God would just really anoint and empower it all. Thank you. And God bless you.
Yeah, thank you, Byron.